Hi, and welcome to Close Up with the Hollywood Reporter documentary filmmakers. I'm your host, Tatiana Siegel, and I'd like to thank all of our guests for being here. Since it's such an esteemed panel of guests, let me have you all introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Kerry Washington, one of the producers of The Fight, and thrilled to be among these esteemed filmmakers and world changers.
Hi, I'm Amy Ziering. I co-directed On the Record with Kirby Dick, and it's on HBO Max, and I'm super grateful to be here.
Hi, I'm Stacey Abrams, co-producer of All In, The Fight for Democracy.
Hi, I'm Jesse Moss, co-director along with Amanda McBain of the documentary Boy State, and very happy to be part of this conversation.
Hi, I'm Garrett Bradley, director of Time. I'm also honored to be here. Thank you.
I am Jim LeBrecht. I am co-director with Nicole Noonan of the documentary Crip Camp.
Thanks, guys. Now we're all going to give brief visual descriptions of ourselves. Jim, could you kick it off and tell us why?
Certainly. Hi, everybody. For people who are blind or low vision, it's something we always do in Zoom calls and in my community, and hoping other people will do this. And it's just simply, hi, I'm Jim LeBrecht. I'm the co-director of Crip Camp with Nicole Noonan. I am an older white guy with a gray goatee. I've got black square rimmed glasses and hair that really shows that I've been in COVID isolation for way too long. I've got a blue shirt on, and there's a red wall behind me with movie posters.
Hi, I'm Tatiana Siegel. I am a white woman with a wine-colored dress on and a blue background.
Hi, my name's Garrett Bradley. I am sitting in a room in front of three Rand McNally maps. I'm a Black woman with a charcoal sweater and freckles, and my hair is straight today.
Hi, I'm Stacey Abrams. I am a Black woman with curly natural hair. I am apparently in love with gold today, so I've got on gold earrings and a gold necklace to complement my red jacket. And I'm sitting in front of a bookcase because that is what I am legally required to do whenever I'm on a Zoom call.
I am Kerry Washington, and I am a Black woman. I have braids right now in a traditional Fulani style braids. And I also have gold jewelry on, some gold earrings with pearls, and I have like a silk sort of snake skin. I'm making myself sound very glamorous, but I have like a snake skin blouse. And I'm actually sitting on the floor in sort of a quiet corner of my house because my husband is on another Zoom conference call and we have to try to not hear each other's calls.
Hi, I'm Jesse Moss. I'm a middle-aged white guy wearing black frame glasses. I'm sitting here in my living room, and I'm the co-director of Boy State. Fortunately, my wife and co-director Amanda McBain gave me a haircut this morning because normally my hair looks a little bit more like Jim's hair, a little more unruly, but she gave me a COVID haircut, so I'm grateful to her for that.
Hi, I'm Amy Ziering. I'm the co-director of On the Record. I'm a white woman. I have glasses because I'm over 50. I have a neon green wall behind me, and I'm wearing a blue kind of like, I don't know, blouse.
I just wanted to gush on everybody's films and also just say like how honored I am to be here. Y'all are so amazing. And Miss Stacey, like I did a project on you for Bomb Magazine from '93 at the Washington March, and I want to try to get you a copy. It was before the election and everything, but that YouTube video is like amazing. And y'all are just all amazing. So I'm just so glad that I'm here, and thank you for including me. I really appreciate it.
Can I just say that I cannot believe where my life has gone in this last year with this film. To be with all of you today has been incredibly meaningful. I've been close to tears at times just reflecting on the changes that I've been seeing, but also just to be able to be in community with all of you has been amazing. And very, very quickly, Stacey, when I watched All In, And I saw you at the 30th anniversary of the March on Washington. I saw Justin Dart was on the platform. And Justin, who's considered the godfather of the ADA, was there. And I love that connection that I saw there, that we all have been trying to work for each other. We've all been trying to do that, and that we should never think that we're siloed, but really it is what we said earlier, a common cause that we all have to look out for each other. And that is the only reason why the 504 sit-in never worked, was because we were supported by the communities that we were also out there supporting. So everybody, man, just keep going. Practice self-care, because we need everybody to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get started. What's something you learned about yourself during the pandemic?
Introversion is overrated.
Well, I thought I was going to have time to teach myself to play the guitar. I clearly can't count. So the hours that I thought I would have they never materialized. So it turns out I hallucinate about things that will never come to be.
Yeah, does anyone else find that they're actually more busy during the pandemic than they were before?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm finding that, the advantage, if you want to think of this possibly having anything that's a silver lining, is that I don't travel, but I'm able to do the things that normally we would do in person. But as somebody who's a wheelchair user, travel's a bit more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's just more difficult. So it's made it easier to engage with people. And, this is actually, in a lot of ways, at times is a more intimate way of communicating with people also, because we're this close to our faces.
I feel like there was a moment, like right when COVID hit, where there was this amazing opportunity for a pause, and I was really curious to see if that was going to happen. And I think it just combusted into just unequivocally revealing all of the problems that have always existed in our country. And so I think I was sort of certainly in a place of, I broke my ankle, actually. I was like hiking and I saw a snake and I broke my ankle. And it was the first time I was like forced to stay still, I think, in my whole life. And seeing what was going on the news, and really trying to think about what a pause would mean for our country. How could we reuse space? How could we reuse buildings? How could we repurpose everything that we know in this moment? Has certainly stayed with me. And I think right now in December, when we see the sort of rise of COVID again, I'm still kind of lamenting that we have not taken that pause, and I wonder what it would take for that to happen. I think I'm thinking about that a lot, which I hadn't, I think, as much previous to COVID.
Why did each of you choose to explore your respective subjects?
I can't wait to hear Stacey's answer, because she's her own subject.
Well, so, I went for this job in 2018. You may have heard I ran for governor. Did not quite work out the way I was intending. And a big part of the challenge was voter suppression. My opponent was the Secretary of State. He was responsible for actually running the elections while he was the contestant. So he essentially got to be the referee, the umpire, the scorekeeper, and the guy at bat. Shockingly, he won. And over the course of his 8-year tenure as the person in charge of voting rights, he purged 1.4 million people from the rolls. He used a system that the Obama administration warned him was racially discriminatory. And in 2018, 53,000 people were held hostage. Their applications to register were not processed. 70% were African American, 80% were people of color. And he knew it was going to happen because we'd sued him about it a few years before when he did it to 34,000 people. He oversaw the closure of 200 polling places, which, according to an independent analysis, meant that between 54,000 and 85,000 people could physically not cast ballots. And when I think about what Jim has done with Crip camp, a lot of the people who were denied the right to vote simply could not physically access the location. And we often don't pay attention to just what it means to be rural, to be disabled, to be poor. When you take away opportunities to physically go to a place to cast a ballot. And then people who voted by mail, there was a disproportionate number of people of color who had their ballots rejected 3 times. It was twice as likely if you were Black, Latino, or Asian American. And it was 5 times more likely that you couldn't get your ballot counted if you were young. And so that happened. I didn't become governor. I spent about 10 days being really angry, going through all the stages of grief and suing him. We sued a lot of people. The lawsuits meant we got more votes counted, but it couldn't undo 8 years of intentional suppression that was on top of, what has been a 20-year effort to block communities of color, poor communities, young people from voting. And so I wanted to talk about it. The piece that was interesting to me, though, was that I was having a conversation with one of the young people who worked on my campaign and then worked for the organization I created after the campaign called Fair Fight. Our mission was to ensure that people had the right to vote. And we were talking, and we were talking about what was happening in Florida when the governor of Florida undid a constitutional amendment that would have allowed returning citizens. And I know, Garrett, you've been thinking about what mass incarceration means. And what happens when people when they're finally free, when they're finally back in community. Well, Florida has laws that are based from basically the advent of Jim Crow, where they're intentionally stripping people of their rights forever. This community of people came together, got 66% of Floridians to say, we want you to have your right to vote back. And the governor stole it again. And when we were arguing about it in public, when we were trying to shame them into better behavior, we called it a poll tax. And this young woman who worked on my campaign looked at me and said, you all need to come up with a sexier a phrase than poll tax. What does that mean? And I thought, oh my God, this is one of the most essential people in this fight. But because she's young, because she didn't grow up either in the civil rights movement or as a child of the civil rights activist, the language of voter suppression has been lost. And so for me, the goal was to find a way to tell people, remind people about the long legacy of voter suppression that began with the inception of our country, but also modernize it so people understood that even though we thought we'd vanquished this evil before, it never goes away, and we have to know the enemy if we're going to defeat it. And so I wanted to put it in film. I'd written a book. I was writing a book about voter suppression, but I knew different mediums have different impact. And so this is a very long story to finalize it. I found a producer and a director and said, I want to make this film and I don't want to be in it. They listened to the first part. They did not listen to the second part. And we can talk about that later. But All In really was about my mission to make certain that no matter who you are, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, that we as Americans have to believe that our right to vote is real if we want our country to be better.
Yeah, I think just jumping off of that, Stacey, I think there's definitely, for me, the motivation, I should say, in making time was very much coming from making a short film called Alone, which was also looking at incarceration from a sort of inherently Black feminist point of view, from a family's point of view. And wanting to extend that conversation with another family as a way of sort of showing the diversification that happens within the system, the way in which many families are moving through the system. I think part of the challenge as a filmmaker is you make a film and then you don't want it to stand as sort of being the monolithic experience, right? There isn't one way in which people are moving through the same situation. And Fox had, Robert had been incarcerated 18 years by the time Fox and I had met one another, and she is in Alone briefly. And she was, she was moving through the system in her own unique way, and she was practicing forms of resistance in her own unique way. And I really felt like I still feel time really stands on the shoulders of a film like 13th, which they're very different in style, they're very different in approach, but I think that the two must kind of coexist, that we need to have as many different entry points as possible to get to the crisis that is the prison industrial complex in America. And so for me, it was very much about trying to extend and offer a conversation around the effects of the facts of the 2.3 million people that are incarcerated in our country and the families that are affected by that.
In my case, I've been mixing documentary films for many, many years, and been an activist in the disabled community at the same time. And although I was seeing films around disability, I wasn't seeing the kind of film that I thought really was from the inside, that really, really spoke to our experience. And um, Crip Camp is co-directed by myself and Nicole Noonan, and we produced it also, and as an incredible collaboration. And I had pitched her this idea of saying, Nicole, I think there's a story here about all these disabled people going from New York out to Berkeley, California, and that there's a story here that links it to the disabled civil rights movement. And as we explored this, she asked me to direct with her, which was an incredible experience. But I didn't want this story to be lost to time. And as a result, I think that we were able to really do what we had hoped for, which is to start conversations and to reframe what disability meant to not only people with disabilities, but to people who are non-disabled.
I think for me, for Boys State, the journey really began with a question that Amanda and I had about this intractable political division in our country that I think we all confronted very acutely after the election of 2016. And really not knowing how to address that as a storyteller and as a filmmaker, and concerned about what our future is as a country. And in the space of Boys State, recognizing an unusual opportunity to look at young people coming together with very different politics and trying to find common ground, wondering what would that process be like? What would it tell us about where we're headed? And also, how has the political discourse of our moment really trickled down and affected how young people are thinking about their political future? We didn't expect sort of certain answers, but we knew that the process would hopefully point us in what we hoped would be a hopeful direction. And that's certainly what we found in that journey.
Yeah, I would say we had a similar experience of not knowing what was going to unfold in the making of the fight. It was those very early days after the Trump administration came into power, and the Muslim ban was enacted. And I was home watching on my television. I had sent bunches of pizzas to the protesters at airports, and was sort of following online all the different lawyers and really standing by, witnessing how the resistance was going to take shape to this real first attack on human rights and dignity in our country. And when Legal Alert exited the doors of the courthouse in Brooklyn and people were chanting ACLU, I was sitting at home thinking, who is going to be following these lawyers? Who for the next 4 years is going to be on the front lines with these folks? Because these are our real life Avengers. These are the people who are going to be holding the line to defend us against all of these issues, right? Whether it's criminal justice reform, disabilities, LGBTQ, immigration rights, abortion rights. I just knew we're all going to be getting attacked. I'm so humbled listening to all these stories. Voting rights, right? We all knew. That's why all of these films came to be. We all knew that we were going to be attacked in unprecedented ways by this administration. And I felt like I just want to be in the trenches with the people who are fighting the battle to try to defend our human rights and our human dignity over the course of, hopefully, God willing, it's only 4 years. And then I started making some calls and doing some research, and I found out that the team that made Wiener, that Elise and Josh and Eli, that they were asking the same question. And I just felt like, oh my God, how lucky could I be to be able to partner with these incredible filmmakers who are so good at that verite, disappearing, being a fly on the wall, that I could serve them and that we could tell this story together. That was the hope, that we would be able to unearth some hope to be able to continue that narrative and inspire folks.
Yeah, listening to everyone is so inspiring, and there's a lot of commonalities. We just in the wake, Kirby and I made the film together, Kirby Dick, and in the wake of Me Too, our cell phones started ringing because we had made 2 films in the sexual assault space already. And in the course of doing a series of interviews in Brooklyn with different women from different industries, which was sort of our original conception, we met Drew Dixon. And I have done probably, close to 500 interviews with survivors of assault. And I remember thinking that this was kind of an exceptional interview in its own right. And I remember looking around the room afterwards, because I don't, I understand my own feeling, but I also like to test it. And 3 of the crew members were like shaking and crying. And I called Kirby and I said, this woman has this crazy story and she doesn't know if she's going to come forward or not. And she's terrified, but maybe we should just sort of follow her. I told her not, she didn't want to sign a release. We didn't want her to sign a release, and let's just see where it goes. And we'll keep doing the other project we were doing. And so that's how we met Drew. And that's how this unique nature of this issue, which is sort of the difference that's the different ways sexual assault afflicts women of color, came to us and came into our realm as a possible film topic. And so then we started following Drew, and we kept doing another project. And then we ended up showing a few clips to Oprah Winfrey, and she greenlit the project and then came on as an executive producer. And we really, crafted the film together very, very carefully. And so that's sort of the genesis story, but it really is resonant with Stacey's work, Garrett's work, Kerry's work, Jim's work, in that it is about sort of the different ways that these institutions disenfranchise and render voiceless, certain populations. And it's not an accident, power sees equality as oppression. And so you're going to see it, happening in, the prisons and in voting and in people with, physical challenges, and in all the arenas, Kerry, with immigration, any populations that threaten, the status quo, which is, white, male, racist, patriarchal society. They're not going to like it, and they're going to fight back. And if they can't fight clean, they'll fight dirty. And so, our film is about that, exactly about that. It's not only, oh my God, is it hard enough as a survivor to come forward and tell your story, but what happens if you're a survivor and you're a person of color? Like, what difference does that make? And the film really carefully unpacks that. And it's just important and illuminating, and a really sort of a powerful, moving journey that everyone needs to see and finally sort of reckon with. Because as Stacey said, it really resonated. And as Garrett said, this isn't something that's happened ex nihilo. This is our legacy. This is 4 centuries of disenfranchisement of women of color. And, they the legacy of trauma is unconscionable and, needs to be acknowledged and changed.
Can I just say, Amy, you said one really important thing, which was that I think all of our films, and I'm not trying to self-serving, are films that people really need to see.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, when I watched All In, I said, oh my gosh, there's no way that anybody that sees this film will not vote in every election. How can you not vote when you see what happened in history to get you the opportunity to vote? And I will talk about this film for the rest of my life.
I would say similarly, when I saw Both Time, the fact that I personally experienced it. I had a sibling who was in and out of the carceral system. I've got cousins and family members that we mark their release time as sort of the last time we saw them, knowing that it's going to be a brief moment of intervention, and then they will go back in. And the fact that you grow up in our communities so often, that's the language of how we talk about family members. Oh, he's out. You don't have to ask out of what. It's just it's a shorthand. Mm-hmm. And what is so powerful about Garrett's work is that the absurdity of time, the absurdity of how we decide a person's life value, and how much of that we're willing to strip away for mistakes. When I was in the legislature, I was often chastised because I will not vote for mandatory minimums. I will not, and when I ran for office, it was used against me because I don't care what the crime is. They're we have to have humanity in all of our decision making, particularly when we are stripping someone of their freedom. And that ties into the fight, because when you're arguing for someone's life, for their legacy, for their opportunity, it is anathema to what we claim to be as a nation that we are so blithe about stripping away years at a time without any sense of the consequence for community, for family, and for, again, this notion of what it means to be human.
I do think that's another thing that ties so many of the films together, is that there seems to be a real interest from all of us in unpacking systems, in sort of unraveling the systems in the way that Amy was talking about, like placing these very personal stories within the context of the systems that control them or guide them or try to limit them or silence them, or learning to navigate those systems, as in Jesse's film, like just to really understand that systems are made up of people, and that people have the power to transform those systems, to right the wrongs, to change the narrative, to create community in different ways, as in Jim's film, right? Like I think that is so much of the power of documentary filmmaking, because we do get to take these real world systems that exist and make people pause. To Garrett's earlier point, right? Like if we can't pause as a country for a whole season, where at least we with our films allow people to pause for like 90 minutes, 2 hours, right? Like to pause and consider the people that make up these systems and the power of each of those people to transform that system if we step into our individual agency.
Yeah, I would just add to that really quickly in saying that I think a lot of that also, which does unify us, but is also, I think, the beauty of filmmaking or any kind of image making in this moment is that the way in which we can see those systems, well, we have to see them. You know what I mean? Right, First of all, and right. I think that that's part of the sort of systematic power is the invisibility of all these systems, right? Yeah. And is invisibility of communities, invisibility of issues. And so how do we think about optics and seeing as a powerful, essential form of resistance, And I think that that's, for something that I remember just thinking also about, to the question earlier around COVID, in the summertime, looking at the protests and thinking about how technology has been used from the beginning of time to try to incite some kind of accountability, right? But that also reinforces the fact that there's 2.3 million people that are incarcerated that we don't see, and that is by design. And so what does it mean in all of our cases as filmmakers to not see something, to not have evidence of something, where that the presence of things should also speak to where the absence is, And I think each of us are touching on that in critical ways, you know what I mean? And I'm thankful for it, because I think it's an unpeeling, it's an unlayering. Even if that pause didn't happen in 2020, I think we're getting closer, than maybe we have, that's a bold statement, but I'm hopeful.
There's been growing concerns in the doc world about censorship from both ends of the political spectrum, and including even an Oscar winner like Michael Moore. Do you see censorship as a real threat?
Well, I mean, I think that when we look at funding for our films, there are certain limitations if you're going to be picked up by ITVS. There are restrictions on who can fund your project based purely on politics. I mean, I don't think anybody could possibly make a Jeff Bezos, warts and all, documentary anytime soon. Or I think of the sort of giants now in the doc space, in distribution. If you look at your 6 films, we have Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and HBO Max, and then Magnolia being the only true independent distributor. So
but even for us, our distribution goes to Hulu after, right? So even that partnership is.
No, it's terrifying. I mean, it's like, honestly, and as the streamers consolidate and it becomes sort of more limited, the options, I've lived through this shift, and I saw a much more open window 5 years ago than there is now. Now they're chasing algorithms much more, and it's sort of, it's more clickbait than integrity. It's less investigative journalism is getting funded. And, so yeah, I do see it as something we have to be very concerned about and really supportive of each other and our films and finding a way to sort of get them out and seen. I mean, I don't know that On the Record, I mean, thank God for HBO Max, but when Apple pulled out, we were rightfully terrified. I mean, these are not easy films to get made. They are not easy films to get seen or distributed. So I do want to give HBO Max a shout out for their courage. And I do want to say, please, everyone watching this, go to all our films and click on them. Like, even if you don't watch them, it'll let other filmmakers get their films made, and it'll show them that, it'll keep our algorithms healthy so that these kind of voices don't get lost. And I'm worried about that.
I see the hazard as much self-censorship, and I speak here of myself and just needing to remind myself to be a risk taker, to be confrontational, to ask tough questions that may be hard for me to look at because of my privilege and where I'm coming from. And I've certainly made conservative choices, and I think the work that I'm most proud of has been the riskiest work. And I think fortunately our ecosystem in documentary is pretty healthy. There are challenges for sure, and I think I always need to remind myself to be a little more courageous, a little braver in taking those risks and using the privilege that I have to tell stories that I don't see other people telling.
But let me ask you a question, if I might. So my kind of evening television watching, I often go to YouTube. And we all have the ability to post something to YouTube. Now, obviously, these are not $1 million videos that people are making. But asking people, tell your own story, post it, and that we're seeing incredibly compelling stories that are outside of the mainstream distributors. I'm not saying that they're not important, but I'm saying that maybe we should be encouraging people to also go out and tell their own stories from the first person and just get them out there. I mean,
absolutely. However, I will say that in Michael Moore's case, it was YouTube that I believe was the one that censored his documentary. So I think that's, at least from the documentarians I talked to, the growing concern is that the number of gatekeepers has shrunk. So we have fewer people fewer tech giants, if you will, able to distribute these movies. And there may be a chilling effect.
Yeah, just one thing I want to add to that is I feel like there's two different ways of thinking about censorship. And like one of them is I agree. I think, Jesse, your note in terms of the impetus that's on you in terms of wanting to go out and find things is important, because I do think we are living in a world where we're surrounded by mirrors instead of windows, right? And that's a scary thing. And that's its own type of censorship where you're just bouncing back off of yourself with the algorithm. But I also think your question speaks a little bit to just the history of journalism and like who has been put typically historically in a position of saying what's true and what the news is. We go back to the very first documentary of Nanook, right? And the complexity around the history of that, which was essentially recreated, by a filmmaker who some might say didn't have ethical relationships with that community. So I think that a lot of folks have said this, but I think it's censorship is certainly a question, but I also think that it has something to do with us trying to diversify who is telling stories, Jim, to your point, you know what I mean? And really trying to open up the space as much as possible. I think the truth has always been gray, in history to a certain extent in terms of who's in power and who's been able to tell us what history is and what's happening in the current moment. To a certain extent.
Garrett, I just think your film really shows how compelling someone can shoot their own footage and tell their own story. And that I think that was my point, that there are millions of possible documentary filmmakers out there.
Yeah.
Well, I would tie it together by saying, when you think about who supported pushing each of these films out, Kerry Washington and President Obama and Michelle Obama, Oprah Winfrey, we've got moments where the gatekeepers shift because, yes, there is who can do the distribution, but there's also who can make certain the story gets told, and telling the story is the beginning. It's, then it's finding out how we can make certain as many people can see it as possible. My experience with Amazon was unusual, which was that it was a starkly political film that was apolitical in that voter suppression doesn't ask you what party you plan to vote for. But it was certainly taken by some to be, the celebration of the left. Although if you watch one of our interviews, it's with, we have the Heritage Foundation. We've got a young man from New Hampshire, not known as a bastion of liberalism. But the point being that in each of these spaces, I hope we also hold to the fact that not only should people be able to tell their own stories, but what documentarians, what you all do that is so fantastic is that you find the stories that need to be told, and you're all ingenious enough to find someone who's willing to help you tell that story. And yes, there are going to be these roadblocks, but what is so powerful and heroic about the work is that you do it despite knowing there might be someone at the gate saying, never mind, someone who might shut off the spigot, but the willingness to tell the story and the compelling nature of what it is and the universality of the stories you tell. My oldest sister was in Girls State in Mississippi in the 1980s. It was a very different moment than what you captured with Boys State. It's the reality that for what you all have been willing to talk about, the stories you're willing to tell, that is the vitiation and the repudiation of censorship at its most basic, because you're refusing to be silent when it comes time to think of the stories that need to be told and the voices that need to be heard.
I would love to jump in on that point. And when you talked about evidence, and how does the ubiquitous label fake news affect your work as documentarians?
It's horrible. It's absolutely, it's extremely ingenious, and it's incredibly horrible. I even saw what, now Trump is doing equivalences about fraudulent elections, is trying to sort of, in that way, sort of kneecap Stacey's work, right? Making everything, saying, we can't trust the results, and is grabbing the rhetoric of, of truth and twisting it and torquing it, so that you completely create an environment where no one knows, how to read or how to interpret anything. It's extremely dangerous, and it's really scary. Mm-hmm. And it's, the other thing that I kind of have a pet peeve about is even the word advocacy. There's been sort of attacks on advocacy filmmaking. And I see that as incredibly destructive. I don't see any work that is truth-telling advocacy. It's actually just being responsible. You're not necessarily advocating for something by just sort of, bringing to light injustices. And I think it's a way of pigeonholing, just like saying someone's an activist. You're just a responsible citizen. It's a way of like, wait, what? You breathe, you're in this, you're in this world. If you do something and say something, that's not activism, that's being normal. And there's a problem if you don't do that. So all those words that try and sort of silo us are really dangerous, and that's why I was saying all of our films are actually completely interwoven, and even siloing these issues, sort of keeps everything from sort of moving forward in a way.
To me, it's a reminder that the institutions that sustain and nurture our democracy are under assault, and things that we've taken for granted for so much of our life are really not. They don't rest on a stable foundation. They rest on our willingness and our ability to make them healthy and make them stable. And I see that in the work of my colleagues here represented in the stories that they're telling and their willingness to ask hard questions about our political leadership, about our institutions. I think that's what motivated us in our project was suddenly this sort of existential realization that this democracy, which perhaps I've taken for granted, is not healthy. And it's not enough to vote. We have to do more. And so I think an assault on the institution of journalism and the free press is just a small part of what we've seen eroded in certainly in the last 4 years, but stretching back, much further than that.
It's so funny, Amy. I love what you said, because I think, as a Black woman, right, I stand at the intersection of so many isms and identity challenges within the structures that govern us. And yet, even I, as a filmmaker, when we set out to make the fight, I thought like, okay, we're going to have one case that deals with our immigration stuff. We're going to look for one case that deals with abortion rights. We're going to look for another case that deals with LGBTQ. And of course, like the abortion rights case that we went with had to deal with a woman at the border, right, who was fighting for her rights as a refugee in this country. And of course, the case that had to do with immigration, actually, I assumed would be a woman from Latin America because of my own biases. And of course, it was an African woman, a Black woman in the immigration story, right? So it's like being open to that connectivity and drawing those lines for folks so that, again, we realize that we are fighting the same fight together for each other. That Fannie Lou Hamer quote, that unless all of us is free, none of us is free. Like that has really become so obvious in this moment in ways that we cannot take for granted.
Yeah, amen to that. No, it's so much is all interrelated to the legacy of racism in this country, and
misogyny is in there, and then the tax on poverty, all of it. Yeah.
Economic.
This question is for Jim. You had the Obamas as executive producers in what was one of their first projects for Higher Ground. How involved were they, and what kind of feedback did they give?
They saw 3 cuts of our film, and we had a wonderful relationship with Higher Ground, Priya Swaminathan and Tanya Davis, and our notes from them kind of came through Priya, but it was more kind of like policy questions. I mean, I only remember one that was that the president kind of asked, well, are there scholarships? Were there scholarships at Camp Jened? But it was an incredible, this was really hands-on. I mean, it was like having another really wonderful partner helping Nicole and I to make the film.
Question for Stacey here. There are a few high-profile Hollywood names being bandied about for ambassadorships in the Biden administration. Who would you like to see from Hollywood in any of these posts?
My focus in politics right now is January 5th and the Georgia Senate runoffs. That's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm working on.
Okay.
Preach.
Are there any subjects that you would never tackle because you might find it difficult to get financing or distribution?
I think if any of us were solely making films for financing and distribution, you would not have any of the films or filmmakers on this panel. We're all telling stories that we knew not everybody was gonna like or want to hear or be excited about, but we knew these were stories that needed to be told. So this is, I don't think this is that group.
How has the lockdown had an impact on your creativity and work?
Well, I can just say that I was asked that question quite a bit at the height of COVID over the summer. And I kept just saying, I'm processing, like I'm in the moment. And I think that's something I'm aspiring to do constantly. I think that like being in the moment, and I think to Kerry's point and to what a lot of people have said here, we really need to like evaluate the current in order to make a better future for ourselves, and so I think for me it was just leaning into the pause as much as I could.
I think also Garrett talked about how the pandemic has really illuminated a lot of the injustices and inequities that were already existing, that were already, bubbling up in our society and our culture, and the ways in which different communities have been impacted to a greater extent has just been illuminated. The fact that Black and Brown people are dying at a higher rate, the fact that women have been impacted economically much more severely during this time, like all of those realities have become maybe more difficult to ignore. And I think that has been, I think it can be a reckoning if we all really continue to hold our officials and each other accountable. I think for me also, I've just been like, there's been a different kind of focus for me that in this time, I tend to be like a human doing at times, not necessarily a human being. And I'm so busy. And so to be forced to slow down and to stay still and to really have to like prioritize and see the value in what matters most to me in my life has been a really profound experience.
I mean, I want to touch upon COVID for a second in the disabled community. And when we first had our first wave, there was talk about what are we going to do about rationing healthcare and what parameters we're going to use. And one of them was, well, quality of life. If you have to choose between two people for a ventilator. And the perception of people with disabilities in their life being, I mean, we were like, oh my God, you can't, you don't know. I'm not going to ask a doctor to decide whether my quality of life is better than anybody else. And so literally, had to go to court and organizations like DREDF had to get involved to save to really protect our lives. Because my quality of life is fantastic. But if you don't know people with disabilities, if you haven't seen a film like Crip Camp, you have this perception from the media that our life is full of tragedy or sadness. And, Crip Camp is full of joy and spunk and sex and power. So our quality of life should not be judged on what you think, but it needs to be really judged on reality.
I will say I've been privileged to join this universe of auteurs as a sojourner. I had an idea and got to go and find filmmakers to help me bring it to reality. I wrote a book, Our Time Is Now, that sort of bled into All In. But what I'm so privileged to be able to do is to spend every day working on these issues that all of you are raising. How do we make certain our young people grow into their power, understanding the full context of what is to be? How do we ensure that our criminal system actually has justice? How do we make certain that women, especially women of color, who have been subjugated and oppressed, believe that they have the right to be heard? I just recently got a chance to do a video for the Crip, the vote, to make sure that we are talking about how important it is for this population to be heard, that they have the power to be a part of the decision making so that they and we decide. And, Kerry Washington, unfortunately, can't escape me, because every time I have an idea about the census or about voting or about how we think about COVID, especially in the Deep South, where people presume poverty is a given and thus ignore the real harsh reality of COVID spreading through prisons and COVID spreading through communities that do not have access to healthcare, where hospitals are shutting down in the middle of a pandemic in the hottest spots. My opportunity in this moment has been that I get to be part of these conversations, and I get to hear and read and see what you all do and what I've been able to sort of help put in the world. But more than anything, try to give voice and shape to the changes that have to be made. And I think that's a privilege that I can never underestimate. But I just want to extend my gratitude for how extraordinarily well each of you not only tells a story, but makes that story resonate for so many who didn't think it was their story too.
Right back at you, and our gratitude for thank you for saving the planet, honestly. I know we can't give one woman, but there is a real Marvel, hero in the midst. And
it's true.
Thank you, Stacey. I mean, I don't even.
We are amongst Storm. Storm is on the chat.
Yeah. And just want to say, Garrett, you said earlier about the pause and the reckoning, and this has been honestly, a train wreck of catastrophes and a blight, for that I don't even have the words to describe. But one gift, I think, was the pause that we had a moment of racial reckoning that we haven't had ever in this country, that I don't think without COVID and without the pandemic, people would have been able to all focus at the same time on the issue of racial justice in the way that they were able to, and be on the streets in the way that they were, because everybody was out of work and staying at home. And I think that actually, and I don't think we're going to rewind from that. I mean, I know we've got a long way to go, but this is how we make progress. So that's one gift we've been given. And as you said, Kerry, COVID has led us, and Garrett and Stacey, we do see our Jesse, the infrastructure is fragile, and we see its cracks now, and there's no turning back from that gaze, and that new look for people whose lives have been closed. So I am slightly hopeful moving forward that there will be progress from all this horror.
I think for me, this past year, what's gotten us through this very difficult political process is putting energy into an important political conversation through our film. And I look at all of the work here, and I feel like what we've all done is sort of sidestepped the black hole that is that person who will go nameless. And we all knew that the day would come where we could put him behind us, but not the problems that we inherit. And I just think all of our films they're not about him. We're not giving energy to him. They're about the problems that we need to talk about, but in a different way. And I'm just happy for that achievement. And it's certainly for me been a healthy way to deal with the challenges we face, but in what to me felt like a healthier way.
What an honor to be in conversation with you all. Honestly, it's really so special. And I think about it, like everyone who watches this video really needs to commit to watch each of these films as a beginning to understanding like the beauty of what's living out there right now in documentary filmmaking, but also as like a commitment to see each other. Like in this moment, more than anything else, we really need to see each other to be able to matter to one another. And you can do that effortlessly by engaging with these films. Let these filmmakers do that work for you by turning you into a more educated and empathetic person in this world right now. All you have to do is press play, and everyone on this video has done the work for you. So just take it in.
What a perfect way to wrap up. Thank you all for being here today for this very important conversation. For Close Up with The Hollywood Reporter, I'm Tatiana Siegel.